Welcome to The Real News. I'm Mark Steiner. Good to have you with us. Last night's primary told us a lot. The delegate count is close. We're seeing an interesting twist in this election. Bernie's platform, his ideas are embraced by the majority, but he's not been able to translate that into primary electoral victories. The majority of black voters went for Biden. The majority of Latino voters went for Bernie. Young people went for Bernie, but did not turn out in massive numbers. And the delegate count is close, 844 to 681. What does this political dynamic tell us? Yeah, the political and media establishment are pushing for Biden. But that doesn't account completely for why voters think Biden is a stronger candidate, even if he doesn't represent all their views. Voter suppression is clearly at work. It might be a major factor in November. Did Bernie do enough in the last 4 years to organize the black vote to build the coalition he needs to win? Are all these things clear and present danger signs for Democrats in their campaign to remove Trump? We'll try to tackle some of these things in the next 15 minutes or so. Our guests today are Paul Heideman, who is a writer for Jacobin magazine, and editor of Class Struggle and The Color Line, American Socialism and the Race Question, 1900 to 1930. And Paul, welcome. Good to have you with us here for the first time. And Jaisal Noor joins us, Real News correspondent who's been covering this election in New Hampshire, Iowa, and Virginia, and doing a lot of work around this. And Jaisal, always good to have you here with us as a guest.
Thanks for having me again.
So let's just pick this up. I mean, on the signature issue of Sanders' campaign, which is establishing a single-payer Medicare plan for all, the American voters seem to agree with him. 57%, Michigan voters said yes, they favor this, and only 37% opposed it. Missouri, 59% said yes, they support it. Even in Mississippi, where he got trounced, 60% said they favored Medicare for all. So what do you think is going on here? What's the underlying issues around this dynamic that is stopping Sanders from getting a majority of the vote in the states that believe in what he says? And Paul, your first time here with Real News, let me let you start.
So I think there's one dynamic is that probably a majority of voters couldn't identify a single policy stance of Joe Biden's. So it's incredibly easy to project on him whatever it is that they favor. The media discussion of Biden has been completely devoid of policy substance. And I think that really makes it easy for people who believe a whole variety of things to see him as their candidate. And when electability is the major priority of voters, as we know it is in this race, that becomes, I think, a very powerful alchemy where voters can project what they want on him, and the entire media, or the entire message that they're getting from the media and the political establishment, is that he is the most electable candidate. He's the one to beat Donald Trump. So in that sense, I think for a lot of voters, it probably doesn't feel like they particularly have to choose between the policy agenda they support and Joe Biden.
Let me leap in here, Jaisal, with their thoughts. I was thinking about an article both you and I read this morning that John Nichols wrote in The Nation, just about this very issue, about this, what happened to him in Michigan especially. So what's your take?
So Medicare for All is 20 for 20. Every state that has polled so far in this election, according to exit polls, the majorities support Medicare for All. As has been said, Sanders has sort of won the battle for ideas over the future of the Democratic Party. Young voters have overwhelmingly gone for him. But yes, it's this issue of electability. That moment of a couple weeks between New Hampshire and South Carolina, where Sanders was the front runner, and you could see the media reluctantly acknowledge that he was the front runner. He got hit pretty hard, and he wasn't talking about Castro, but that was raised in that 60 Minutes interview, and things like that were just brought up. You even heard it last night in media discussions. Saying, reduced to Sanders saying he praises Castro, right? So this way that there's no context being given that he's praising these universal programs that President Obama also praised. So we're seeing a lack of substance, a lack of context. All the media articles today are praising Joe Biden's speech last night. They're not talking about how he threatened a worker, in that plant. Just yesterday, he threatened to slap someone, take them outside after they attacked him over his record on gun control, which was a false attack. And you could see why he'd be angry about that. But you didn't see that mentioned in the headlines. You talked about, you heard about how presidential his speech was, basically giving his victory speech last night. And that's, you've seen a lot of Biden supporters talk about, we need to we need to cancel this debate. We need to end the primaries. It's over. But just on Monday, when you had members of the Sunrise Movement, when you had members of other groups, pushing Biden to do better on climate change. That's a top concern of young voters, climate change. Biden's plan, doesn't call for 100% renewable energy until 2050. And and so activists have confronted him over that. He's called them Bernie bros. He said, no scientist agrees with Bernie's plan that you can have them, you can reach 100% renewables by 2030. And dozens of scientists said you're wrong. Like, we can do better. So I think the media, as has been said, the media is giving Biden a pass so far. They haven't talked about his record. You barely hear mention that some of the people that are now supporting Biden questioned his mental acuity just a few weeks ago. And the fact that he bombed the last few debates are just being ignored right now. And his performance in those debates is really what sunk him in those polls going into New Hampshire and Iowa. So I think a lot of people are looking forward to Sunday for this next debate. That's just going to be Bernie and Biden, and Bernie's going to challenge him on these tough questions like climate change, like trade.
Let's step backwards for a moment here. I want to turn back to Paul, but let's play these videos we're talking about that you alluded to. This first one is, and for those who have not seen it yet, is Vice President Biden confronting an auto worker who confronted him. Before we show you the next one, and then the next piece will be what Biden said at the last night in a very different demeanor. But let's watch these two in contrast, what we're watching here.
I'd like you to explain how you plan to not only keep us working, but how you intend on getting the union vote when there is a large portion of the union workers that are gun enthusiasts, and you are actively trying to diminish our Second Amendment right and take away our guns.
You're full of shit.
All right, thank you.
No, shush. Shush. I support the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment, just like right now, if you yell fire, that's not free speech. And from the very beginning, I have a shotgun, I have a 20 gauge, a 12 gauge, my sons hunt. Guess what? You're not allowed to own any weapon. I'm not taking your gun away at all. You need 100 rounds.
So when you were in Beto, when you said you're going to take our guns,
I did not say that. That's not true. I did not say that.
It's a viral video.
It was a viral video like the other ones they're putting out there. They're simply a lie.
Your voice, you said that you're taking the gun.
Well,
he just clarified it.
Wait. Take your AR-14s and what?
Okay, this is not okay.
Hold on. All right. And let's
don't tell me to go outside.
There's a lot of guys. A lot of guys wanted.
I'm not worried. Hold on.
so much.
Give me a break, man. Don't be such a
You're
worried
pushing
guy.
up on me.
Hey, there's a lot of.
Well, Trump is clearly not presidential, but what was that? We'll come back to talk about it in a moment. First, let's look at what he said after he won these campaigns.
To all those who have been knocked down, to all those who have been counted out, left behind, this is your campaign. Just over a week ago, many of the pundits declared that this candidacy was dead. Now we're very much alive. As I said from the beginning, this election is the one that has character on the ballot. The character of the candidates, the character of the nation is on the ballot. It's more than a comeback, in my view, our campaign. It's a comeback for the soul of this nation.
So, Paul, what does this say to you? This is what Justin was alluding to earlier when he was talking about these two videos. And you have Biden actually calling this worker, who he didn't agree with, putting his finger in his face and saying he's a horse's ass, you want to take it outside. I was flabbergasted.
Yeah, I mean, I think a Democratic politician threatening to slap an auto worker could be a short history of the party since 1979. In that sense, I think it's to be expected. But, I actually think this video will probably play well with a lot of Democratic primary voters who want to see Biden look tough and put together. I mean, he's confrontational, but he's not confused, at least. And I think for a large number of quite middle-class suburban Democratic voters who Biden is going for, I think they'll be happy with this video. What it says about his prospects in November, I think, is another story entirely. And I think that's a mistake that the Democratic pundit class has been making persistently over the past few weeks, is seeing aspects of Biden's strength in the primary electorate as forecasting similar strength in the general election, and I don't think any kind of equation like that can be made. So I think some sector of Democratic primary voters will be quite happy with that, but I think if the Biden campaign were smart, they'd be very worried about what it says. And the second video I thought was interesting because Biden's running this campaign on kind of the negation of everything Trumpian. It's going to be he's going to be completely different from Trump. Characters on the ballot. And one, I think he's vastly overestimating how many American voters actually vote on things like character. Trump got 48% of the vote, and most of the people voting for him probably wouldn't have affirmed his character, even though they were voting for him. There's this kind of aestheticized idea of politics about the kind of image of competency and decency that was, of course, personified by Obama, that I think a lot of the Democratic political class continues to cling to as if it's a recipe for electability. And I'm just not sure how much evidence there actually is that putting character on the ballot, quote unquote, is a strategy to win people. Most people aren't voting on whether the person in the White House seems like someone they'd want to talk to at a dinner party, right? They're voting on whether they think their lives are going to get better. And a lot of people are voting because they think the wrong kind of people are running the country, and they want someone in power who's going to stick up for them. Neither of those things are character exactly. So I'm again wary of that strategy. And the other thing that strikes me is just how profoundly backwards looking the entire messaging behind Biden's campaign is. Democratic commentators just went crazy on Trump for saying "Make America Great Again," this backwards looking nostalgic vision. And now Biden is offering an almost mirror image vision of we're going to go back to decency. We're going to go back to when character mattered. All of this kind of stuff that is not one bit less nostalgic than Trump's. It's a different kind of nostalgia with certainly a different class inflection to it. But it's just striking seeing that clearly most of the Democratic Party's kind of officialdom and the people uniting behind Biden don't have the confidence to run a campaign on actual ideas. They don't think that they can win running on ideas. And that is really striking. And given what you were discussing earlier and the way that Sanders' agenda has won such widespread support, it really feels like there's a contradiction there within the party.
So, I mean, picking up on those themes, I mean, I was thinking about what Van Jones was saying after this race when he said, if the Democrats defeat this insurgency and kind of gloat about the defeat, where do they go from here? And the question is, where do they go from here? And where does this campaign go? We haven't heard very much from Bernie Sanders since the defeats in these primary states yesterday. And I don't think he's dropping out. I think the push is going to be hard to really kind of push the campaign even harder and building towards the Sunday night's debate. But the question is, where do they go from here? And let you start with you, Jaisal.
So I think Sunday's debate is going to be, like I said, it's going to be key. It's going to be the first debate. We're just going to see Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden go at it. So far, Bernie's been sort of reluctant to go after Joe Biden, at least in the recent debates. One thing he has talked about is his record on the Iraq War, something that Joe Biden just 2 nights ago misconstrued and said he said on MSNBC that he voted to stop war, which is not true. There's video of Biden something like the year after he voted to support the war in Iraq saying if he knew everything he knew now, there was no weapons of mass destruction, then I would have made the same vote. So on one hand, you have that. On the other hand, you have to sort of acknowledge that Biden, his policies have somewhat already moved to the left. There was a good piece in the New York Times by Jamel Bouie saying that, Biden's a man of the party. He's not as ideological. He's not very ideological. He's going to go where the party takes him. And so there is a chance he could be more, he'd be more open to adopting some of these more progressive ideas. He says he supports the spirit of a Green New Deal. He hasn't really shown what that means. And so you have that, but then on the other hand, you have the article in Axios, which floated potential cabinet members. You have people like Jamie Dimon, people with a direct hand in the financial crisis, 2008, that Biden may appoint to his cabinet. So I think I don't think the fight is over. for the nomination. But I think progressives are going to have to also start thinking about how best to pressure a potential future Biden administration to make it as progressive as possible. And the other thing is that progressives are going to keep doing what they've been doing, which is challenging incumbents. And taking on these, we talk about the Democratic establishment, the people that have backed Biden, overwhelmingly across the country. I think they've opened themselves up to potential primaries. A lot of senators that backed Biden supported Sanders' Medicare for All bill, and you had Biden saying that he would veto it. Something that the majority of Democratic voters that have voted so far say they support, something that multiple studies say would actually save money.
So, so let me conclude with this. I mean, there are a couple of things here in terms of where this goes from here. It seems to me, that the fight from the left is still very strong. This may be the strongest single electoral left movement I've seen or witnessed, I think, in our lifetimes, and where that might take this campaign in the fall. You also have this real problem with voter suppression, where you saw these tremendous lines taking place, young people trying to vote in Michigan. You saw these lines of people not being able to get in. You saw the mayor of Kansas City talking about he was being denied the right to vote as well, and then he had to come back later to vote. Most people couldn't do that. So that's a factor in all this as well. So I'm just curious, just very quickly from both of you, where this might take this campaign, and in terms of taking it to Trump and to the white supremacists who kind of rally around him and the neoconservatives. So what are these dynamics? How do they play against one another and take us to November? Paul?
Yeah, well, I think trying to predict what happens between now and November is going to be really tricky. I mean, it is possible that next week Joe Biden forgets where he is on stage, and and his campaign is over. I think it's very hard to rule out a sudden collapse of the Biden campaign. So that remains on the table, and that's one reason why I think Sanders is totally right not to pack it in anytime soon. If the party knows what's good for them, they're going to actually try and test Biden, and that has not happened so far in this campaign. In terms of voter suppression, the U.S. backed the coup in Bolivia over supposed voting irregularities, and now it's come out from a number of really nonpartisan statisticians that there's no evidence of irregularities whatsoever. Meanwhile, in the United States, people all have to take 7 hours out of their day to vote, the U.S. voting infrastructure everywhere is decrepit, is insecure, and is not in the least built to actually facilitate electoral participation. And I think there's no doubt that has hurt Sanders. I'm not sure it's been one of the primary factors in this election in terms of explaining why he hasn't done as well as many of us hoped he has. But I think there's no question that it's a factor. And, primaries are always low turnout elections. In November, I think it has the potential to be an even bigger factor.
Just a quick final thought.
The Sanders campaign called out Michigan for these long voting lines, saying this is something it's something the Democrats criticize Republicans for, but Michigan has a Democratic governor, and they obviously were not prepared. And this, we know the turnout was increased versus previous years, but the fact that they weren't prepared for a primary makes you concerned what you're going to see in November. That's one thing. And the other thing is that, the center swing, if they want young people to turn out, they're going to have to earn that vote. You see people online saying that, there's obviously a small Bernie or bust movement, but I think you need to get people excited, especially if it means waiting in line 7-8 hours, and maybe the lines will be even longer in November if these midterms are any sign of it. I'll say it again. Really looking forward to Sunday's debate. I think we're going to get a lot more information about where Biden stands on Sunday, if he can hold it together for a whole debate. Remember, there's not going to be an audience there. Biden's campaign had pushed to have an audience, to have like a town hall sort of format, something the Sanders campaign had pushed back against. But we know because of the coronavirus, there isn't going to be an audience. So they're going to be getting questions from moderators. And we're also not going to see these campaign events. So again, Biden's sort of getting let out of the hook. There's going to be fewer interactions with with people, with supporters, at least for the next few weeks, which again is an advantage Biden if he keeps doing stuff like threatening to smack people that disagree with him.
Well, at the very least, we will have this program Monday morning and see what we learned Sunday night and what actually happens while waiting to watch that. Jaisal, Noor, thanks so much for the work you do for us here, and good to have you with us on the air as a guest. And Paul Heideman, pleasure to meet you and have you with us. Look forward to you joining us many more times here on The Real News.
Thanks. Great talking to you.
Thank you both. And thank you all for watching. Let us know what you think. I'm Mark Steiner here for the Real News Network. Take care.
Thanks a lot for watching. Appreciate it. But do us one more solemn favor. Hit the subscribe button below. You know you want to. Stay up on the videos.